What up, y'all? I'm Dr. CPS here with my girl, Dr. Layla Brown.
And you're tuned into season 2, episode 4 of The Last Dope Intellectual.
Ow. All right, y'all. So for today's Shoot the Shit, I really want to get the input and the insights of my colleagues about what constitutes a platform on social media. But before we do that, let us give a shout out to our patrons.
So we have 3 new patrons. We're so excited, y'all. Y'all keep rolling in every week. So we have Veronica Ankrum, Trevor Clark, and Patterson Deepin. So thank you all for subscribing.
Thank y'all. Okay, so let's hop right in. Okay, so my question is this. Can you have social media without having a platform, especially if you have like a large following, let's say like thousands of followers? And then what does it actually mean to have a platform? Okay. And I will be honest, this question precipitated because somebody tried to say that I have a platform, not LDI, but my Twitter, that I have a platform. And that came about because I was telling people like, oh, okay, you don't have to be a brand. You don't have to sort of monetize all of your hobbies. And this person was like, oh, well, that's real rich coming from somebody who has a platform, which is essentially a brand. And so, of course, I took some umbrage with that shit. Now, the reason why I feel like my social media in particular is not a platform is because I don't feel like I use it intentionally. I ain't trying to sell nothing. I'm not trying to proselytize. Like I have my ideology and my politics, of course, but I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. Plus, I'll be posting hella random and ratchet shit, you know? And so I don't feel like I use it, number one, to make money, or number two, to push any agenda. So that's my perspective. But what do y'all think?
Well, my first thing is I do think there's a difference between a platform and a brand. And so I would agree with you that, you know, in terms of not attempting to monetize everything you put out there, and really not even trying to curate it to that degree and extent, I wouldn't say what you have as a brand, but you have 30,000 followers.
No, I don't. I got like 29 point something.
Okay, so
29.4.
Get out of my business, Black.
And so I would have to say that I do think you have a platform. And I think that is so regardless of whether that is your desire, that is so regardless of whether or not you intentionally curate it that way, because you do have a following of people who are looking to see what you post. And even though I know you say that you like you're not trying to curate, and I don't think that you are, but there are particular things that you're interested in. And so people follow you for a particular perspective. And I think that that's what they're getting when they follow you. And so I wouldn't necessarily call it a brand, but I do think you have a platform.
Yeah, I mean, you had a tweet recently that went viral. It has 33.6 thousand likes.
This statistician over here. I'm just 7,000.
7,224 retweets and 357 quote tweets, and it's like actually still counting as I'm talking. Like I'm watching it grow. So I think that constitutes a platform, because it's not like this is like a random tweet, and then the rest of your page just gets like one like, you know, or one retweet. So I'm saying it's not, as much as it would be nice to think we could just say what we want and there's no like consequences from the market. I just don't think that's how things work. I mean, as an artist, I know artists who didn't give a shit about even making money off their artistry, and people just wanted to buy stuff. People loved it. People started booking them. Like it was just hard to avoid, just because, you know, they had an appeal. I mean, that's just the case of a market. So I think if you get online, and even if you just start randomly saying whatever's on your mind and that starts blowing up, then those tweets don't mean the same as they did when you were just talking to 500 followers. Like they has a different implication, and I don't think you can avoid that.
You LDI has what? How many followers? What? Like we got 400, something like that, as a as a page. There's 400, and I think Two Black and I individually might have somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000 people. So there is a distinction, I think. And I know you asked me yesterday, like, what's the threshold? Like, what? I don't know what the number is, but there's a clear distinction between having 400 or 2,000 followers versus 30,000 followers.
Okay, but I have several pushbacks on that. Number one is that I feel like I didn't necessarily build that following. The first wave of followers I got was because No Name retweeted my racial capitalism article. And the second one, there's been a few ways, but I would say the second big one was when I was doing those interviews with Boots Riley. Which also, that thing with Boots Riley was not because that was maybe I don't know. Anyway, that was just a random tweet. It's also not as if he had been following my content and then was like, let's talk. Like, you know what I'm saying? And so I just feel like I didn't necessarily, it's not as if I built that from the ground up. I just feel like it was a series of random occurrences.
That's normally how people's platforms get built, though. Like, I mean, usually somebody bigger retweets you, or usually something goes viral, or I mean that's a lot. Even artists, again, like that's how people grow. Is I mean some people work to get retweeted by No Name. You didn't work for it. I'll give you that. But
I did write the article though, so I did labor for that article,
right.
Not for her to retweet it or anything. But
right, so I'm saying like if you do something that's interesting, it doesn't always get retweeted. I mean, there's plenty of people to write good shit that nobody reads, right? We all know that, but there's that random situation where somebody just that has a big following read it and you know it blows up, but it's not always intentional. I mean, again, I know poets who they just recorded a random poem on an open mic. It got shared. Next thing they know, they went from 2,000 followers to like 50,000 because the poem went viral. No one intended for it to happen, but they did write the poem. So.
Yeah. So then what? Okay. So, but I want this, since you don't have necessarily have an answer, Layla. Two Black, what is the threshold for you? Is it 5,000? Is it 10,000? And then the other question too, is it like how much your content is circulating? Because there are some people who have like, let's say 15,000, but their tweets have like 36 likes or something. I don't know. And so I don't know, is there something, how do you, when does it become a platform? Like what are the parameters by which it goes just from being like a popular social media account to a platform?
I mean, it's tough to like judge a number because it depends on the nature of the account, and it's also tough to know like how frequently. But I think if you capped like 15, 20,000 people and you're regularly tweeting, and we know we could come to your page to get a certain type of topic, then it becomes a platform. Like even if you're just interested in Black politics or racial capitalism or communism or black people in communism, the African diaspora, etc. I know I can go to your page and find something on that. If I'm trying to inform something I'm writing, I can be like, well, let's see what CBS said today, and you might have said something about it, which is just likely because these are the things that you like to talk about. So even though your goal is not to be like, hey, I'm the Black girl communist, like that's not your move. That's not what you're going for.
Young Black commie, period. Feel me?
That's how it comes off, because that's how the platforms are built. And I think that's what No Name was saying. Like the platforms are built to elevate you like that, because so it's not really what the individual is doing. The platforms built around that, because the fact that they incentivize followers, they incentivize more visibility with followers. And then the more followers you have, the more visibility your tweets get, the more your ideas get put out there, et cetera, et cetera. That's just the nature of the beast. It's just like capitalism in general. So I don't think that's something any of us can fully avoid unless we don't, have that many followers. Like, I'm sure it was hard for y'all to even find when we do in these tweets. Y'all know I never tweet. So
either. So that's what I was struggling to find stuff for me.
Yeah, Layla's same thing. Was like, I was just like, all it was retweets, But if you constantly talking, then and you got something to say, or in some cases, I think in the case of our situations, everybody has something to say. But some cases, as we know, plenty of people be saying dumb shit, but it gets retweeted. it gets attention. And our platform's also built for that. It's built for controversy. It's built for bullshit. So that's just the nature of the beast and all of
I
that.
also think that, like, I know when we were talking about this before, Sharice, one of the things you said that you felt like one of the reasons why it wasn't a platform is because it wasn't intentionally curated. And one of the things I said to you, which I think is important, is that you have made a decision about what your public persona is like, right? And you've made a decision that your public persona is no different than who you are as a person, right? Some people
because I was like, my public persona is Sharice Burden-Stelly. To me, and I just be out here doing shit. Period.
That's where I was going with it.
Yeah. Okay. Because that's how it looks like. I don't have a persona, because the term persona connotes like, you know what I mean? Like your representative, basically. I ain't got one.
But my point about that was that even that is presenting something, right? To say that I can be a dope intellectual and I can also like ratchet shit and I can also like music or whatever other stuff, and that none of those things are not mutually exclusive, and I can be all of those things. And I think that there is something to that too. And so even without the necessary like intentional curation or like, you know, cutting yourself off in certain ways where you only present this thing, I think that that's also something that is appealing to people. People are saying, you know, like, even though I can go to CBS's page for, you know, political shit, I also know every once in a while I'm gonna get some light content, some shit that's just gonna be controversial or fun or whatever. And I think that's something that people are looking for too, is like not necessarily always these intentionally curated with color palettes and all this other shit. Like, you know, there's something there too. And so I think that even without the intentional curation, there is something that you're presenting in that way that I think people are drawn to.
Yeah, and I think even beyond social media, things become symbols beyond our intentions.
Yeah.
I'm using this analogy, not referring to you directly, so don't take this in an offensive way. But like when people become like, when cults are formed, and you'll look at the origin sometimes of a cult, like when it's about someone who pre-existing the moment of the cult, like they're already dead, or when they were alive, they were completely against the idea of a cult. But they die, and for whatever reason, people take it somewhere else, right? So even though your goal was like, you're literally like, I'm not a messiah, and they're like, yes, you are. You know, there's like a thing in philosophy called, I think it's uptake representation, as in the people see you as something and they thrust you into it, even though your goal was never to be a representative of the group. Like they decide on you that you're going to be the representative of the group, symbolically speaking. So like Twitter and Facebook, they're built around, like social media is built around really that kind of idea, which is kind of scary when you think about it. But so there's not much you really can do about that. Like,
but you know what's so crazy is that when people ask me what I would be if I wasn't academic, I have said cult leader in the past because I know I have an authority.
That's what I was just thinking. Like, this girl has literally said that before.
Well, because I know I have an authoritarian strain of my personality, which is why I intentionally don't navigate social media in that way as a quote unquote influencer or whatever, right? Because I know we have there's a sort of cult of personality type and cult of celebrity culture that we have in this country. And so I intentionally do not, like, I have never sought to build a platform. But the other thing that No Name said that really resonated with me was that in terms of opportunities that you get, and I won't say paid opportunities, like, listen, Puma, look, if you're trying to sign the kid, but I've gotten nothing like that. It's been more so like millennials are killing capitalism interview, or even Black Miss, because you probably found me on social media. Black is, I don't know how else you would have found me, right? Because all my other shit is in academic journals, all that type of thing. You know what I mean? And so I will say that opportunities have come because of that. And so that's also why I sort of like, I feel the need to take responsibility for having a platform, because I have benefited from it. But I also like, it's that the responsibility aspect that like, I think makes me push back. Cause it's like, I want to be able to say what the fuck I want to say. And you know, when it becomes a quote unquote platform and all that shit, that's where you open yourself up to like all kinds of other, you know, you can't just say whatever. You have to be much more mindful. And like, one thing I'm not is mindful.
I don't think that's true.
Like, what does it mean to be outward facing? Because this even relates to us being academics, having like, whether it's a public intellectual or outward facing or whatever. But I even think, I just feel even the way that I use my social media is even different than some other academics, because like, number one, I ain't got no agent. And number two, like, again, I'm not constantly retweeting the shit that I do. Sometimes I will, but I don't know. So I don't know why it makes me so uncomfortable to think about having a platform, but it does, y'all.
Yeah, I think that's the question you need to interrogate. What are you uncomfortable with about it? Because also, what is qualitatively different for you about that? If you have 30,000 followers versus we have 30,000 people following the show.
Well, because the show is the show. I want the show to have 1 million followers, because the show is meant to educate. It's meant to be political education. It's meant to curate. It's curated. It's meant to bring together smart, dope, involved people to have conversations about things we care about. So I wanted to have a platform.
But you're still at the helm. And so if the show has a platform, you have a platform.
We are at the helm and 2 Black is in the back. We in the front right now, but you know what I mean? No, we are at the helm. So
she doesn't appear convinced, but
as we go to planting thoughts, the most popular segment.
This is also the thing. Like, I think Sharice got back on Twitter. It wasn't
July 2020.
It was pandemic. Like, I have had a Twitter, I think, according to my account, for like 10 years or something. I don't even know. Honestly, I really don't even know how to use Twitter. Like the just tweeting stuff, like I don't know. That's why I don't tweet like that. And that's the same thing. Even like I tweet stuff that I'm interested in. Like I tweet like shit about plants, or sometimes I see things that are retweeted, or like something is happening and I'm following a hashtag right at a moment. Mm-hmm. But other than that, like that's the only way I really engage on social media. And even like I used to be more active on Facebook, but even still, that was within a network of people that I really knew in real life. It wasn't so much like people that I didn't have actual interactions with. And so like, even I think that the speed with which you build, and I know you already gave us your benchmarks about why that happened or whatever, but your ability to do that speaks to that. And I don't know at what point if it would ever even be possible to disentangle LDI and CBS.
It wouldn't.
So y'all gonna join my cult?
No, I'm good.
I don't do
that. Y'all rude.
You do organized religion, so you ain't gonna get me on a cult.
This is close. This conversation was close enough, so I'm good on that.
Well, thank you. No, but seriously, thank y'all for talking through and working through this with me. I still am ambivalent, but so the moral of the story is let just people be out here on their shit. Like, why does capitalism have to make everything into fucking popularity and money and brands and all that shit? That's so trash to me.
Yeah, I mean that would require a different platform, right? As in an app or something, but again, the nature of these things are just not built that way. Like, I mean, I purposely don't talk that much because I don't want anything to do with it. I'm not saying I would get 30,000 followers, but I don't even want to like open the door to that. So that's why I just don't say anything. Like, so, I mean, but that's the nature of it. You can't really avoid it. If you do something well enough, I've experienced this in other worlds, like people are gonna flock to it. And that's because that's just how people have been organized. So that's just something folks always have to accept. You don't get to just be this kind of individual, separate of all of that.
Ma'am.
All right. Bye.
Okay, y'all, it is time for this week's planting thoughts. So I have decided to feature one of my faves. If you all used to watch other things that I've done plants on, you've seen this one already, but I like this one today because we're also having a conversation about mentorship later on. So this is the Monstera deliciosa, sometimes known as the Swiss cheese plant. One of the things that I really like about this plant is the kind of symbiotic nature of the plant. So what this plant tends to grow on like jungle floors, and one of the things that happens as it grows is that the larger leaves tend to develop more of what they call fenestrations, which are these openings in the leaves. And one of the reasons why they do that is to allow more and more sunlight to get into the leaves on the lower level. And so I always like to think about this plant as a way to think about our sort of social relationships with one another, that, you know, as we grow, as we climb, we have to make room, we have to make way for our people to have access to the things that we're trying to get access to. And I think that this plant is always a nice lesson for that. So that is this week's planting thoughts, the Monstera deliciosa.
All right, y'all. So we are bringing back another segment, Class in Session, where we talk to students to get their perspective about what's happening on campus and in the world. And so we have two very important students here, students of Dr. Layla Brown.
Okay, so I'm really happy because these are two of my former students at different stages of my life. So first we have Ashley Torres Carrasquillo, who is a queer Black Boricua first generation college student. Before becoming a PhD student at the University of Boulder, Colorado in ethnic studies, Ashley worked in human services for 5 years, coordinating an underage shelter for youth experiencing homelessness, providing emergency housing, food, and guidance for schools and healthcare enrollment. Ashley's research interests are influenced by her childhood living in public housing in Santurce, Puerto Rico. They have been involved on anti-racist art-based research projects with youth in the Dominican Republic, in Colombia, and in Puerto Rico. Torres's master's work, which they completed under my direction at UMass Boston, was a participatory ethnographic research project with women of color and gay community leaders who reside in public housing residentials in metropolitan Puerto Rico. Torres's collaborative project focuses on problem solving during times of crisis, forms of resistance, and possible futures. The second person that we have with us, it comes from a different stage in my life when I was a doctoral student at Duke University. Chloe Ricks. Chloe Ricks is a PhD student in political science at the University of Pennsylvania. As a scholar of comparative racial politics, her work is broadly concerned with the political consequences of anti-Blackness. She holds a BA in International Comparative Studies from Duke University, where she graduated with the highest distinction after her senior honors thesis, Last Stop Destination, Poverty, Anti-Blackness, and University Education in the Mississippi Delta and Brazil's Baixada Fluminense. I don't know if I said that right. Which received the ICS 2018 Distinguished Thesis Award. Ricks's current research is comparative politics, seeks to extend her prior work with newly focused attention on the relationship between racial and religious identity formation and electoral politics. So I'm so happy to have you all both here today.
Yeah, so welcome, y'all. So I want to just get right to it because I know we have a lot to discuss. And so I wanted to know, how has your experience of mentorship with Layla helped you in graduate school so far? And then each of you can kind of describe what type of mentor Layla has been to you.
Maybe
Go ahead, Ashley.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. It's so awesome to see Dr. Brown again, and meet all of you. So I think that what has helped me most is that Dr. Brown, she's been she like trusts me. Like, I feel like when I have conversations with her, like she truly believes you know, what I'm saying, and she's extremely encouraging and is always looking at, you know, actually this is just one step right now, and is able to kind of like guide me through the next steps. And I feel like I need that type of mentorship, especially when I was doing my master. I don't know what I was doing. So I think that that's what has helped me most. Like every time that I see a fellowship opportunity or a grant or anything, I always send it to Layla. And I said, I'm mostly like, oh my God, I don't think I'm gonna get it. And Layla's like, just apply, Ashley. I think that that has been the most helpful. And yeah, I can speak more, I guess, later.
I can go. Okay, so I think first, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's nice to meet all of you that I have not met. But let's see, Layla's Layla's mentorship, I do think was transformative for like just the trajectory of my career in the end. I think, I'm not sure I knew what was happening at the time. I'm not sure she knew what was happening at the time. I was an undergraduate and she was a PhD student. And I was, you know, at the time, I'm first gen college student. So I'm not sure I really knew what it meant to be a PhD student or what she was doing. She was just someone who wasn't the professor. First time I had a Black woman in the classroom. And I was like, okay, cool, let's talk all the time, every day after class. I would go to class just because I knew she was there. You know, if she didn't show up, I'd be like, dang, I wasted a trip today. It's just like, that's how interested, just invested I was in seeing a Black woman show up to class every day. And so because of that, it really, her mentoring really shaped kind of how I engaged with my entire life, my undergraduate life, and ultimately figuring out who I would be as a scholar. I didn't really know those things. I had a very specific track that I thought I was on based on where I came from at the time. It was very, from a small place. I'm from Mississippi, the Mississippi Delta. I knew a very specific context that felt like the whole world to me. And so then to try to study international, like area studies at the time, Layla really helped guide me, helped me pick Latin America as a region of focus, because I didn't know anything about anywhere in the world. And so I was really just looking for something that felt more close to my experience. And I ended up finding that more outside of the United States than in it. And so without her guidance and framing, I don't think I would have reached those conclusions or realized that I was trying to ultimately make transnational arguments. And so just Layla's conversations with me helped me find myself as a scholar.
I'm glad, Ashley, that you stopped saying Dr. Brown. I was wondering when you were going to start saying Layla. But I will say that working with both of you all was transformative for me too. I mean, I think, you know, both of you all have experiences as being first gen. So I was a first gen grad student, not a first gen undergraduate student. And even trying to figure out what it meant, what I was doing, it was helpful to be walking you all through what you all were trying to figure out to help myself. Oh Lord, you cat people. So I'm curious about where you all are now and the type of work you've had to do to find mentorship, whether that be intellectual mentorship or personal mentorship in your programs, or if you've looked beyond that, what types of support have you been able to find and what has helped you continue where you are right now? You can go, Ashley.
Yeah, I feel like I need to say how I met Layla before I kind of continue on. So Layla and we met at the MWSA when it was in Atlanta, if I remember correctly, or was it in Baltimore? Oh my God, Atlanta.
I think it was Baltimore.
Yes, and I went to a panel and I felt similarly on how you described it, Chloe. I just wanted to talk to Layla afterwards, and then we just chatted, and then a few months later, we had added each other on Facebook, and then a few months later, she was coming to UMass Boston when I was applying to do a master's project, a master's program. So yes, I feel like that was necessary to say. And in terms of finding intellectual and like mentorship, personal mentorship at UMass Boston. Layla was my first Black woman identifying mentor that I had at UMass Boston. As an undergrad, I had mentors for different classes and projects that I was doing, but it wasn't truly like a holistic like mentorship that truly like also care about how I was doing personally and what else was going on in my life. So I think that it was difficult to find that at UMass Boston, both doing an undergrad and then a master's project, until I met Layla. But then now as a PhD student, starting this journey of a PhD in a pandemic has been extremely challenging. Um, so I was excited about this conversation because I wanted to think back of what were aspects of the mentorship and the continuous mentorship that I'm getting from Layla that I need and want as a first year PhD student. So it has not been easy finding mentorship.
Thank you. And I just want to say, when I first met Layla, I also wanted to just talk to her, not at first, but once she dropped the word Hugo Chavez of Venezuela, I was like, oh, me too. So we all just want to talk to Layla. But okay, so both of you have mentioned the fact that Layla was a Black woman, given where you both were in your educational development was very important. And so can you speak a little bit more about why having a Black women's mentorship is important? What is it that, obviously it's just beyond melanin and gender, what is it about a Black woman mentor that means so much, especially if you're in periods of unsurety or you're trying to choose a path, et cetera?
I think for me personally, having a Black woman mentor in general, Layla played that role for me definitely, and I find myself being forced to play it now that I'm in a role with students, is that the most valuable thing she gave me was kind of like, if someone else gave me advice, like letting her know what it was and her being able to tell me like, that's one size fits all advice, which doesn't really work. It doesn't really apply to you. And having someone be able to give me counter advice was really helpful, because then I could think through myself, okay, if this didn't feel like a good fit, like if the advice I got just felt like it would be my undoing, but this person is telling me it's best for me, it's helpful to talk to someone that can confirm like, no, that is your undoing. And the reason it feels like it's your undoing is because they don't really know where you're coming from. And I think like, especially when you're already lost or looking for direction, if you get direction from the wrong person, like you're down that path, right? And so I think having someone to kind of know where you're at, where you're coming from, and maybe even having experienced some of those things before can already tell you what the landscape is going to be, is helpful, I think. And yeah, it has been difficult. I think I am valuing the prior mentorship more because it's still what I'm carrying on to now. It's not just you're replacing mentors. It's everything that she told me as an undergrad, I brought into graduate school, and I'm trying to figure out when I see those things unfolding based on what she was telling me when she was a PhD student, and so I think having a Black woman, is that I have seen someone go down the path and I can kind of moderate, is this looking the same? Why or why not? Things like that, I think really make Black women mentors essential.
I think that for me, when I guess thinking back, when I realized that it was primordial having a Black woman mentor, somebody so important, is when I was getting ready to do my field work on how we often had very intentional conversations. And Layla works in Latin America too, and my work is in Latin America and the Caribbean. How people were going to perceive me, we were like constantly having those conversations. I think that was extremely important for me getting ready to take kind of like this project to life with people. I think that was what was one of the aspects that it was most important, to have someone that moves in the world very different because of the way that people perceive them. But I feel like in addition to that, I think that right now, I'm not necessarily looking for a Black woman mentor, but rather aspects of mentorship that have helped me for me to kind of continue on with this journey.
So this isn't actually one of the questions that we share with you all, but I'm curious. So I know that when I met, so Duke and UMass Boston are very different types of institutions. And I know one of the things that I think, Ashley, you were up against at a place like UMass Boston was really not being given enough direction about what was even possible for you to do, right? And so I know that some of those early conversations that we had were that like, you could and you should go on to get a PhD if that's something that you were interested in. And I think, Chloe, I don't think the question of whether or not you could pursue graduate school was as big of a question at a place like Duke, but the types of questions that you wanted to ask were some of those things that were kind of difficult. And I'm curious about what types of things you found useful in our mentoring relationship that helped to push you to say, these are in fact the questions I want to ask. Like I know, Chloe, for you, there were questions about why you wanted to compare the Mississippi Delta to Brazil, right? And for you, Ashley, what it meant to go back into public housing, what would be the equivalent of public housing projects in the US, which is where you grew up, to ask these kind of questions about what it means to organize as women, as queer folks, particularly in the aftermath of, was it Irma? No, what was the, it was Irma, right? Yeah. So I'm curious about how our conversations, I know at times, not so much with you, Ashley, but with Chloe, I know early on we had a lot of, Chloe was like, I don't understand why you're so mad, like what are these questions that you have going on? So I'm curious for you all, what was helpful in pushing your actual research agendas forward?
Yes, that is true. I did used to think you were mad all the time. I have since apologized. That has been redacted. For the record, it's been recorded.
She mad. She be mad though.
Clearly, yes. In the 6 years since I had those sentiments, I have grown. And so at the time, not knowing what it meant to be a graduate student, and when you, I think, yeah, at the time I was hearing it's kind of like, I'm trying to do this, they're in my way. And I was like, I don't know, like, I don't know. That's just as far as I can get at the time. But I think, again, now seeing myself go through some of the things is like having that kind of, I guess, validation, but there's a better word for it I can't think of right now, but kind of asserting that, especially, what am I trying to say? Like if you're in a specific discipline, asserting that what I'm doing is this discipline's work. I've chose this discipline for a reason because it seems conducive to my arguments. This is what this is, right? And the question of whether or not it'll be best received in your discipline, that's like a secondary question. I'll deal with that later. I'll figure it out. But kind of in the phase of what do I want? Who am I? What type of scholar am I? The mentorship or things we talked about also, it kind of clued me into that. I would be fighting for that a bit. Even now, as I'm third year in political science, and I still to this day struggle with trying to articulate, like, what do you all want to hear from me to make this look like political science back to you? Like, I'm reading the literature. This is clearly political science to me, but what do you need back? And even being able to ask those questions, I don't think I would have known to do that without Layla's help. Because sometimes, like, it's not always clear that's what people are looking for. It's just kind of, you say your research idea, especially if you've talked to colleagues in similar positions or similar identities and they just get it. And then you try to say it to an advisor or something, they're like, I don't know why you're here. This doesn't make any sense whatsoever, right? It's just like kind of going in knowing like, no, I do know this is exactly what I mean. I have the literature to prove it. Tell me what about my research question is not really resonating with you, and I can rephrase it. There's no way I would have known to do that. I could just imagine myself being much more derailed, even more derailed than I already am sometimes, but just trying to figure out, okay, no, this is exactly what I said I'm doing. If it's not legible to you all, I can figure out what you need from me, but if it's looking like the work of the people that I'm inspired by, then that is what that's all that I care about, first and foremost. And And so that I would say that's definitely one aspect that like your research gets furthered by having mentors who know what's going on.
Like, what do you need to read to catch up, Bob? How about that?
Yes, you know, kind of like instead of it being a junior scholar versus a senior scholar, it's kind of like, here are what all of your colleagues also with your seniority have to say about this. I'm following behind them, right? And it just really helps me get out of this position of like, you know, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm doing what they said. And so it really helps though, because it's intimidating to be a junior scholar with someone saying like, you don't know what you're doing. And I disagree. And I'm like, well, they don't. So here I am over there.
I think that for me, definitely as you said, Layla, I needed guidance. I was lost. I knew the type of work that I wanted to do with people in my community. But I needed a stronger understanding of like Black feminisms, for example. I have a bachelor's in gender and women and gender studies, but we didn't really dig into Black feminisms. So I think that in terms of my theoretical approach, I think it was extremely important to be in conversation with Layla. And then in terms of the methods that I wanted to use as well, because I love doing work with communities. I love figuring out questions with communities. And I don't think everybody understands why is it, maybe they do understand it, but they don't care to be in conversation with them at the same amount that I do. I truly think that we need to be fully processing and creating the steps with community. And for me, what was most important, I guess, in moving forward this project, my master's projects in particular, was to understand transdisciplinarity. And I think that me and Layla were learning that together. So I think like kind of how you mentioned it, Chloe, like we were both kind of like learning together. It's not like there was there was a little bit of power dynamics. That's just how the world works. But Layla and I could have real conversations. I could be like, I don't know what this means. And then we'll figure it out together. And those are some things that I keep with me. Like I want to make sure that I do that when I'm in conversation with students and potential mentees. Yeah. Thank you, Layla.
I'm just happy that you all agreed to come today. And I'm really, really, I don't know. When I think about the things that I try to offer, it's also in relationship to the things that I got. And, you know, my mentor has been on the show before, Dr. Muhammad. And I think about the different types of things we need. And I think Sharice and I even have that relationship. It wouldn't necessarily be classified as mentorship because we're friends and peers, but I think we do those same kinds of things. And
it's
so I
lateral. It's just lateral mentorship.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so I guess, you know, maybe just for all of us to think about as a last thought before we close is how, you know, you spoke to it a little bit, Ashley, already, but how are we applying the lessons that we've learned from our mentors in the way that we move forward and engage with people, whether that be students, potential mentees, our friends, you know, how we share information when we have it, you know, what are your thoughts about that?
And then just to piggyback on that, what makes a good mentor? Like, what are some of the qualities that you have received and that also that you hope to model as you're working with students and mentees?
I was going to say one thing that I have now that I'm teaching myself or like TAing is that I think I realize how much a space is just sometimes what students are looking for. Kind of the understanding that their thoughts may change and may shift from what they're saying to me, but to kind of figure out what's like just helpful guidance. I think that's something that one I valued in Layla, and she was the first Black woman I ever had in a classroom. Then I had finally had a Black woman professor my senior spring, and that was something that she also did that I'm like, yes, okay, this is what it takes. Though, like when I think of those years with those, you know, those semesters, that's when I accomplished the most as a student because I felt like I was doing something that was driven by me, my desires, with some like helpful guidance and pushing me. You know, it felt like an opportunity I needed to seize. And I feel like that's what a good mentor does, is that like, it felt like it was in my best interest to figure out what to do with the information I was being given. And me personally, it's not many people that make me feel that way. You know, it's just, it's not often that someone's telling me to do something and I'm not trying to think through like, okay, in what ways might this derail me elsewhere? You know, it's really helpful to have someone communicating to you that they are a space where they're going to, you know, push you, maybe offer some guidance, may even be okay with letting you know when they don't like the choices you made. But at the end of the day, it was your choice. Yes. Yeah, they will let you know.
This is a fight over poli-sci. It's fine, whatever.
You made the right choice. Word to Black Studies and poli-sci, period.
Thank you, right? Okay, so they might let you know when they're not particularly joyous about your decisions. However, you can keep that, you know. So whenever you encounter those problems, you're like, I already knew this would be a consequence of this choice because I heard the con already, you know? So even then, I feel like a good mentor, you made the decision, but if it's messing you up, you know why it's messing you up, you know? And so those are things I took from Layla and that I try to exercise in my mentee-mentor relationships as well.
I guess for me, well, something that's like super, like, I guess, practical for me and in what I needed and what I need from mentorship is to have somebody that's truly listening to me and can even speak back what I just said, even, you know, just as a clarifying. I think that there has not been many times that I have mentors that truly are, you know, not on their phone and devoting the time to me. And I really appreciate that. And I hope I can, you know, I model that. I think that that means so much on how much respect you have for the individual and their work and their time. So I don't know if this is just my experience, but I think that's something that's extremely important to me and that I look for in other mentors, and I hope I can use for when I'm engaging in conversations with students and mentees.
I think that's really important, Ashley, because I think what that says, and I even remember having that experience in grad school, having somebody who literally she would just listen to what I said. And she wasn't a Black woman, she's actually a South Asian woman, but who would just listen to what I said and just say it back to me so eloquently. She made me feel like I knew what I was doing, right? And so like, I think that there is something there to say that like, I'm not actually giving you anything that you don't have. I'm just helping you shape it, right? So like you've already figured out the questions you want to ask. Like maybe I'm giving you some context, some other things to think about, right? But that you have the ability, you have the skills, you know what you need to do. You just need some guidance and direction. And for me, that's what mentorship is. Mentorship is believing that you have the foundation, the fundamentals, and you just need some pushing or prodding here and there, as opposed to like, it's not my job to create you as a person. And even as I, you know, push back with you, Chloe, against poli-sci, it's not my job to create you in my image. It's not my job to make you do what I do, right? It's my job to help facilitate what it is that you're interested in.
Just polish it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Put some little polish on it. Well, thank you both so much. And of course, thank you, Layla, for this discussion. I think that we don't necessarily talk about mentorship often enough, like especially in a neoliberalized landscape whereby we're just supposed to be these autonomous, great subjects, as if we're not part of a collective, as if we are not a person because of people. And so I just appreciated the conversation, and I hope that we can have you both back just to talk about your work and any number of other things. So thank you so much.
Yes, we absolutely will have you back because you all will be in a place to share your work. Okay.
Period.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much
for having us.
All right. Have a good day.
All right, y'all. So for this session of Live from the Streets, we are going to talk about what has been going on in the Atlanta University complex. And we have three very important people here to speak with us. All right. So first off, we have the student Ellis Sawyer, who's the co-founder of the ATL Ujima Collective, a junior philosophy and urban studies major at Morehouse College, who's interested in empowering communities through mutual aid, direct action, and art. We have the amazing Professor Tamanisha John, who holds a position as an assistant professor of international political economy at Clark Atlanta University's Department of Political Science. And we have the homie Tunde Osazua, who is a member of the Black Alliance for Peace, working on BAP's programming, membership support, and outreach work. Tunde is also the coordinator of the U.S. Out of Africa Network and a member of BAP's Africa team. Tunde lives on Muskogee land, which is also known as Atlanta, Georgia. So welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here.
All right, so thank you all for being here. We just want to get you all's perspective on what's happening in the AUC right now and why. And it would be helpful if you all could give us a sense of what some of the demands are on administration and what administration's response has been to those demands.
Right. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss some of the issues and also progress of the current movement going on in the Atlanta University complex. So at the beginning, kind of a few weeks ago in October, a team of students with a group called ASM Takeover, along with an outside organization called Georgia Stand Up, reached out to an organization I was a part of, the Maroon Party, which was previously was the YDSA chapter for the AUC. And from that, they told us that we were going to do a solidarity sleep-in or occupation of an area on the promenade, first in solidarity with Howard, but again, also for the housing crisis that was currently going on at all four institutions in the AUC, which is Spelman, Morehouse, Clark, and Morris Brown, or five actually, ITC, the Interdenominational Theological Center. And so we did that. But when we got out there, I met with Georgia Stand Up. They didn't have tents for us to do the occupation. So I ended up having to reach out to my contacts at CMB, who they let me know that they donated $500. And I reached out to the Atlanta Homeless Union as well, and they for other contacts in the area, and they reached out to actually Tunde from Black Alliance of Peace, and he donated some tents as well. So we were doing that. Like our team at the Maroon Party, we're setting up the tents, making sure that people have what they need to have a sleep in. And during the day, we will be canvassing for what we thought were the demands that students wanted, like getting information about what dorms had mold, etc. What other issues or problems students had with administration regarding reimbursements for hotels or other transportation costs. And during the day, we do that. But we found out that the demands are practically already written. And while our team was canvassing, I'd get a message from the organizers of ASM Takeover that we'd be doing a rally in about an hour. And it kind of hurt when I saw these rallies, because they're basically block parties. And I found it offensive when one of our first things was to be in solidarity with Howard, and we were out here throwing block parties, and one, not even rallying the students about the ongoing housing crisis. And so that was happening. And alongside that, we also had our security, who was provided by Georgia Stand Up. They're Blue Lives Matter supporters. And one event that comes to mind quite frequently was the night of the meeting with President French, the president of Clark Atlanta University. My friends and I, a few of us, like from part of the Atlanta Ujima Collective now, we're waiting out in the tents because we were told breakfast would come out around 7, right? I haven't showered in 5 days, none of that. So I'm like waiting outside. I had the night watch because we didn't trust our security anymore. So we had a few of our people who've been out there since like 4. And so that's happening. We're waiting. It gets to about 8:50. We're curious where the student who was supposed to be in the meeting and our negotiator was. And it comes around like 8:54-ish, right? The meeting's supposed to be at 9, still no breakfast. We see 2 people walking past us in suits. And that's what got me a little mad, right? Because I haven't showered in 5 days, walking past us in suits. And I was like, wait, isn't that the student organizer? And then I said, hey, name, are you going to the meeting? They don't even look back and they say yes. And they keep walking past all the students, that some of them who were out there at 2 a.m. writing the demands that are supposed to be heard. And this was a student whose dorm also caught on fire. So we hurry up, we grab our posters, because we're like, we're gonna stand in solidarity with our student, right? So we even completely silently go in the student center, right? Posters down, nothing. We're just being students this morning, right? And just nothing's going on. And the student who was up there writing demands stays in. So because the campus police comes out, they start locking the doors. They're like, we need you to leave. And I'm like, okay, I go to Morehouse. A few of the other people went to Spelman. So we're like, we'll step outside. We'll be on the promenade. But the student whose dorm caught on fire and they wrote some of the demands at 2 a.m. and slept in tents, belongs in student center because they're also a student of Clark. They were removed by our negotiator from Georgia Stand Up, physically removed by our negotiator from Georgia Stand Up, who came up in a black SUV with some people from Clark administration. And she was telling us, walked us all the way back to the tent site and said, I negotiated that no students would be no protesters would be inside the student center at that time. And I'm like, that's not the case. If this is supposedly a student movement, students should be able to at least occupy the space that they're previously allowed to, like the student center, at least, and stand in solidarity with our student whose dorm did catch on fire and did help write these demands. They should be allowed at least in the area when the meeting's happening. I can understand if you don't want them in the meeting, right? So that was a little compromise that we did. We have a video of this. She was crying through a little tantrum, and we were like, okay, but we'll put the signs down, we'll do a silent protest. So we did 8 of us. So there was 4 people in the front, 4 people in the back, and we did a little fist up, walk past in solidarity. Because there was cops, they locked our student center. The student center was locked from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. during this meeting, and cops had to let students in. So I'm like, we're gonna stand and walk in solidarity, and that's what we did. Mind you, while that's happening, our security tries to stop us from having a silent protest and tries to pull us away. And since then, we spawned the Atlanta Ujima Collective. So we ended up getting a call, and this is the first time I'm saying this loud. We ended up getting a call by the person who owned the lot, which happens to be a Morehouse alumni, Spike Lee. Spike Lee didn't give permission to Georgia Stand Up to be on his property. So when the property managers came out, when we told Georgia Stand Up to leave, the property managers came back, coincidentally. And we told them, I wrote a little note. So Spike Lee called us, he gave us permission to stay on the spot. And we decided that we're gonna do the movement that we decided should have gone in the first place by addressing and building community power, and as well as making sure all students have the opportunity to be heard. So what we decided to do is to follow our ancestors a little bit with the Black Panther Party's free food program, is host a free food pop-up. So every morning we have right around every afternoon till the end of night that we have free food for students who don't have access to the CAF. And this is also an opportunity that we have, like the Black Panthers, to bring up issues going on in the community and things that we've heard, and also collaborate. Like we begin to collaborate with other orgs on campus to do ones for feminine hygiene products for students who don't have access, but as well as the houses community that don't have access, and also doing a school supplies distribution with College Girls Rock. And this all happened from our free food pop-up. But as well, we're doing a survey because we don't believe all students were heard and for the demands to be put out. And that's what we're doing right now. So we're doing a survey at our tent as well. And so far we've collected around 400 responses, but we're trying to get at least a good majority where we can say that all students all types of students have been heard, and we have a variable understanding of what the larger issues are quantifiably. And from that quantifiable standpoint, we'll try to address them through our own community work and mutual aid by doing things like the free food pop-up, like the community garden, and like doing like other like ride share things and seeing what problems we can address ourselves, but then bringing the community our data and saying, here are the problems that we've listed. What should we bring as big core demands, and how should we address them? Because I think overall, I want to start demanding a student co-op, housing co-op. Other universities have these, and students should have rights over their own housing, especially if the institution is not following through and keeping our housing safe. The majority of the freshman dorms at Morehouse, and as well as Clark Atlanta, have mold in them. One of the dorms, Myrner, on Clark Atlanta's campus, has such a bad mold incident that people have been hospitalized. And we've had one of these students who's friends of a student who's been hospitalized and actively is in conversation with administration, bring up to the dean, and the dean says, we're not unsure about any mold that is happening in the dorms. We have videos of maintenance people coming in to these dorms with mold, saying that it's just dust, wiping it out and putting the same vent back. So this is what's happening on our response from our administration. So something new needed to happen. So we at the Atlanta Ujima Collective decided that we need to build community power.
Thank you so much, Ellis, for that very thorough interview. I think you pointed to a lot of dynamics, a lot of contradictions between the different interests of the organizations, between administration and students, and even toward the end between students themselves. And I think that that's a good segue into the next question. I want to bring Tamanisha and Tunde into the conversation and get you all's perspective on what has faculty response been to the student movement. And what has the community response been, whether it's community organizations or the surrounding community? So Tamanisha, can you start with how have the faculty responded or not responded?
So when the protests were first initially happening, I found out because I saw someone post a picture of like the tents and the students, starting to collect together on Twitter. And the first thing that I did was I searched to see how I could aid them. I don't have tents or anything, so I donated what I could at the time, which was just $30. And I sent like a broad text message to everyone in my department. There's only 6 or 7 of us. And I told them, hey, this is happening. Students are protesting. And none of them had heard about it. And then the next day when I went onto the campus, I again brought it up to them, and none of them had heard about it or seen it yet because they hadn't taught classes. And I said, we're the political science department and we claim to be critical and we have this perspective. Why are we not on top of this? So that was part of my confusion and also frustration. And so once more professors started to get wind of it in my department, one of them automatically reached out to, I don't remember exactly who, but someone in administration to just ask them, have they went out and spoken to the students and seen what the demands were? And in less than an hour later, he came back to me in disbelief because the response was, oh, these are outside agitators. So no one had went and spoken to anyone at all yet, but they had just broad-based labeled it as outside agitators. And so the response was that when I had to go and walk to teach my classes, I had to show my ID to prove that I was a student or a faculty member at CAU going to teach classes. And so we already saw how the narrative switched from, we don't even know these protests are happening, to those are just outside agitators. And now we need the police to make sure that everyone on campus is a CAU student or faculty member. And so that was a bit frustrating. And then almost immediately the demands came out. And something that I noticed about the demands, and also other people in my department as well noted, is that the demands were quite weak. And they only asked to have a meeting or speaking with the president or the dean or the provost, I think. And we thought that that was a strange list of demands stemming from people sleeping outside in the cold. And so when Ellis was talking and he said that they took away the generator, the first thing that came in my mind was that we've been having 40, 50 degree weather here. It's cold. So if you don't have a generator, you're literally freezing outside. And so I think that the faculty response more or less was underwhelming. And I've seen this trend throughout my time in the university, first as a student and even now as a faculty member, where there's only ever been two types of faculty responses to student protests, student uprisings, and student movements. The first one is to quickly go to administration to find out whether or not we're going to squash these protests or pay some lip service to the protest in a positive way. And the second type are the more sympathizing with the protesters. And when I say sympathizing with the protesters, I mean, you have some professors who will lend monetary support, write letters of support, even go out there and speak to students in the protest, or talk to students and say that they, really agree that this is happening. And I think that the reason why you have those two stark contrasts is because a lot of professors, they just side with administration often, and I don't know why. I like to say that you have a lot of bourgeois class aspirationists, even if their paychecks don't align in the academy. And then the second one with the sympathizers is that you do have a lot of professors, given the corporatization of the US university, who feel as if they cannot take strong stances that are super, in support of student uprising and movements because of job precarity. So there are a lot of adjunct professors, and there are a lot of professors who don't have tenure. And typically the ones that do have tenure are part of what we would say are the old guard, in the sense that they are the ones who would most likely just talk to administration about how best to squash the protest and not necessarily do something radical. And so on my end, being a first-time faculty member, being on the other side, I was a bit disappointed in the amount of support I can or cannot lend to student protests and student movements. Even prior to becoming a faculty member, I've been told by other faculty members that you have to be careful when protesting or joining protests in general. And I think that it creates an environment where you have people in a space that want change, that actually want change, but they feel as if their hands are already tied before they can even start advocating for change. And so I would even push myself into that sympathizer category. And that's just being honest, where it's like, yeah, I can lend support and I can lend vocal support, but what can I do isn't necessarily clear, given that I am a contract employee at the end of the day.
Thank you. Go ahead, Tunde.
Yeah, appreciate the question and the opportunity to be here. I think as soon as I heard about what was going on at the AUC, I tried to head down there after I got off of work, and connected with Ellis, and learned that tents and sleeping bags and those types of things, blankets, were what was needed. So we went and bought those with the support of BAP. Also tried to connect Ellis with some alumni at the AUC who had been involved in protests in previous years, and we're familiar with how these things kind of go. But our focus, right, is about making a better world for African people everywhere, and that especially includes students, because of the crucial role I think students can play in movement building. And we think that political education is so key. We think that just really understanding the root of the problem is very important. So we've been engaged in different efforts to do research on this issue of housing and what's driving these deplorable conditions on these campuses, not just in the AUC, but at HBCUs and colleges kind of across the nation, right? In terms of these substandard conditions. And what we found specifically in Atlanta is that a lot of these issues are tied to properties being built and managed by landlord or construction or developer companies that kind of are driving like privatization of housing on campus, right? So there was an article that put out a few weeks ago about Howard and this whole idea of HBCUs and neocolonialism or whatever, and how I guess HBCU students can contribute to the struggle for our people. And so that article focused specifically on a company called Corveus, which is like a massive capitalist like slumlord and defense department contractor. And so, you know, Corvallis has a horrific record with not just student housing, but military housing. And so we try to find out what's going on specifically at the AUC, because though Corvallis has contracts with, you know, some public Georgia universities, they don't necessarily, well, we don't know that they have any contracts with, you know, Spelman, you know, Morehouse or Clark Atlanta or Morris Brown or that other institution you mentioned, Ellis. But we do know that the AUC is actively pursuing public-private partnerships, right? And in the Morehouse, you know, 5-year strategic plan, they talk about pursuing those partnerships to monetize and create recurring streams of revenue from their real estate holdings. And so that's something that they're actively pursuing. We found out that, you know, Spelman has entered into some contracts with an organization, or a company rather, called Brookwood Group, right? Which has built many different residence halls and housing projects with a number of colleges. And because these are private institutions that aren't necessarily accountable to the students, we do find that, you know, these substandard conditions will, you know, be found, right? Like they're in search of profit. They aren't necessarily trying to, you know, maintain the best living conditions for the students. We also know that there's been some more, I guess, well-branded efforts to privatize housing. There's a project called Choice Atlanta that is part of the housing and urban development programs like Choice Neighborhoods effort. And so basically they're focused on the Atlanta University Center or complex, and they got a $30 million grant from. We want to engage in more and more political education because we think, you know, organization is important, political education is important. So what Ujima Collective is doing in the AUC is so important, and we just want to be able to support whatever it is that they're working towards, because it's really that community power, that student power, community control of education, I guess you could say, is what we should be working towards. Because right now these schools are not run for the benefit of the students or the community. They're run for the benefit of these you know, rich interests, right? Like Corvallis, I think it's some slumlord billionaire that is the CEO or owner or whatever. So we understand that there are specific interests at play that are benefiting from these substandard conditions that we're seeing at Morehouse, Spelman, Morris Brown, you know, Clark Atlanta, and that other institution. I keep forgetting. I apologize to the folks who go there. But we understand that we have to be engaged in, you know, fighting for the power of the community and the students who go to these schools, so that we can fight this issue, because gentrification is affecting all of us. And I think we need to be able to fight back and be informed in our struggle against it.
Thank you. I mean, I think thanks Tunde for even bringing up those kind of contradictions that come up when we think specifically about what this means for these protests to be happening at HBCUs. And so I wanted to maybe continue on with that thread and maybe get Ellis and Tamanisha to also kind of weigh in. Is there something unique or specific about the fact that these protests are happening, not only at HBCUs, but at also the sort of preeminent HBCUs in the country? And then I think even beyond that, which is why I think it's important to have this conversation with students, faculty, and community members, the fact that both of these HBCUs where these things are occurring, and they're probably happening at many more. I know there were similar issues when I was in school at NCCU, but the fact that these HBCUs are also in two of the places where the Black population in the US is heavily concentrated. And so there are these really interesting contentious relationships between these premier HBCUs and the Black communities that they exist in, and at the expense of, to some degree. So I'm curious what you all's thoughts are about the sort of particular importance or uniqueness of these protests and these issues occurring at these institutions in particular at this moment.
So I just want to comment as someone who's new to HBCUs in the sense that I've never been to an HBCU. I won't lie, I'll be completely honest, but when Clark Atlanta University recruited me to become a faculty member there, I didn't know anything about Clark Atlanta University. I didn't even know it was an HBCU. And when I told people about it, everyone was like, oh my God, Clark Atlanta University, it's an HBCU. And so I kind of got the feel that it has the same allure as Howard. And I do have friends that attended Howard. And what I think, or just based on plain observation as someone new to this space, is that you have these institutions that when you walk onto them, the neglect of these institutions is quite apparent, but the allure or the illustriousness surrounding the name sort of makes sure that things keep in-house. And so
the brand.
Yes, there's very much this notion that, we have all of these problems that exist, but we keep it in-house. The outside world doesn't need to know that it exists. It doesn't need to be in the news. In fact, at an orientation I went to, that was something that was stated when the housing issue first came to light. It's like, we need to make sure that students and people don't feel the need to go to social media first. Let's address this in-house. And so I don't think that these issues are new. What I think is that you have this notion amongst Black people generally in the US that, even if something is substandard, because the person serving you that substandardness is Black, you have to deal with it in-house. But what happens when you keep things in-house is that then you have Black institutions that should be educating Black people about the situation of Black people in the Americas and in the world more generally, then becoming whitewashed and watered down as much as the PWI. Something that I've been asking myself since I've become a faculty member here is, how are we really distinguishing ourselves from PWIs outside of the fact that our student bodies are majority Black? We're still teaching them the same nonsense, the same whitewashed history that you would get at PWIs, and we're not necessarily treating them any better. And so even when we talk about the Atlanta student movement or, Clark Atlanta University having this history of W.E.B. Du Bois, what does it mean that when you're in a class full of seniors, they have never heard of him, never read about him? And so I think that there are these blatant internal contradictions that exist, and they're allowed to be hidden by the fact that a lot of these institutions pride themselves on being private, even though they also receive a lot of federal funding as well. And so it puts them in this weird situation where it's like they're private, but not really, because they're dependent on this aid. And so I would say that the disappointment has always been there. These problems of mold have always been there. If you go on these campuses, the neglect is there. We have buildings that have new names, but you wouldn't know this is that building because the old names are still on the building. My first thing that I noticed when I went to the university in the first week was, where are the signs that are supposed to tell me where places are? Like, they don't exist. And when they do exist, they're so old that the names on them are old. And so you have this broader decay that's already been happening, and it's just been covered over, pushed under the table, and not spoken about because those in charge of it, so to speak, are Black faces.
Yeah, what about you, Ellis? I imagine you specifically chose to go to an HBCU. What has you being there and then this protest revealed to you?
Yeah, so I'm in an interesting situation as well. I'm a transfer. So I've had the experience of a PWI. My father is a professor at University of Pittsburgh, so I've been around what predominantly white institutions that have large budgets and large populations, and I've seen what their dorm and food services are like. So I have like that perspective, and I agree almost completely with what Dr. John is saying, because online when I was taking my classes, since I am a philosophy major, we do address like certain Afrocentric things, but the majority of our students aren't like Africana studies or philosophy majors, and I'd essentially be getting that same education if I was at any other school in Africana studies program. But what I would say is nice about it is the unity that we do have with alumni, particularly from Morehouse, and the respect that we do get from faculty, is that I don't have to worry about discrimination when it comes to being in the academic space. It's like we have academic safe spaces, but when it comes to what these institutions are doing and perpetuating, it's neocolonialism. Like I can't figure out a way to address it, that the school that Martin Luther King went to is actively funding and raising funds for the largest police academy, that the school that Martin Luther King went to is allowing mold to be in his same dorm room. Like the fact that our new services are all being, our new buildings and stuff are all being funded by companies like Microsoft and Apple, who enslave children in Africa in mines. Like there are all these contradictions that are so blatant that I will expect from PWI along with the education, because we're not learning much. Like I'm learning about Martin Luther King and like Thurgood Marshall and things like that. I wanted to learn more about Kwame Ture and like Malcolm X and like Thomas Sankara, like Patrice Lumumba, like activists like that that won't get me into that. Like the things that radicalize Martin Luther King and things like that are not at this institution anymore. We've moved so far past our history, and I almost want to say it's analogous to Michael. I don't want to keep bringing this and dragging this person, but it's analogous to Michael Julian Bond. Like the reason he's allowed to go to all these speaking events is because of the history of his father with SNCC and the Atlanta student movement. It's the same thing with Morehouse and Howard. They're allowed to raise all these money from activists, because if we look about what happened, like the largest public fundraising campaign that happened for these institutions over the last maybe since they began, I don't want to say that because I don't have the numbers for that, was the Black Lives Matter movement, period. So they have some incentive of inspiring a movement happening on our campus, and that's what I saw exactly happening with ASN Takeover and Georgia Stand Up. Same thing was happening at Howard campus with I think it was called the Live movement. Those are the same people down here. It's a money raising opportunity. And I think particularly why I think it's important for us is also the same contradictions that you're bringing up are exactly why it's important for us to address. Because we have these contradictions. We have the awareness that HBCUs are in some way supposed to be different from PWIs. So we just need to make that difference ourselves. And the one way we can do that is by bringing in faculty members that are sympathizing with the cause, by bringing the maintenance workers that have been walking past that are sympathizing for the cause, and by bringing community members that are being effective and sympathize with our cause as well, right? Bringing them all into it and acting like that, because PWIs, they're cool with gentrifying the space. Like Georgia State's gonna own most of Atlanta at some point. Emory's gonna own most of Midtown. Like this is what's gonna happen. And we could actively provide affordable housing for our neighborhood. Like there are properties that Morehouse owns where we can turn into affordable housing options for the community. Like these are what the things that we should be requesting. The active blight that's happened to us, we should be actively building out those vacant lots that we're using to just lower property values in the area and establish community gardens. We need to be responsible to the community members that we so actively bring about into our campus, because as we know, what previously happens with HBCUs, they were community centers. The AUC was a community center. It's no longer that. We don't even allow visitors in our library. And I could be wrong, but I don't know where else there's a nice public library in the West End. And for my own intents and purposes, I think the largest library is Woodruff. And the fact that we don't even allow community members to come in there, while even some of that property is on Atlanta sidewalk, there are all these issues that can only be addressed by going externally, and we can't keep them in-house any longer. And our HBCUs need to do differently from our PWIs, especially if you're advertising that you are different.
I do want to note that across HBCUs and PWIs, that the reason why we cannot actually invite people onto our campus anymore is as a direct result of student protests, right? And I'm not saying that it is the fault of students, but it is backlash against what the work that students were doing in a different era to actually engage staff, community members, and other people. And so these universities have increasingly cut down on what it means to be able to engage beyond the classroom, right? And so that in and of itself is a structure that we have to continue to push back against, which is why I think even for us today, it was important to try to have this conversation as robustly as we could with students and faculty and community members.
Yeah, and that's where, community, campus policing comes out of something called the Scranton Report. It was like a 1970s era report that was about student protests. And interestingly, they had the same discourse about outside agitators linked to communists, of course, right? And linked to Black radicals. But so this is, as they say, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Tunde, in terms of somebody who is not attending or teaching at a HBCU, but as part of the community where they're located, is there something noteworthy about this happening in these institutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you think of, like Morehouse and Spelman and Clark Atlanta and all these, universities, that these are celebrated institutions, right? Like these are institutions where they say that, the graduates will change the world, right? And they supposedly have these traditions of resistance that I think, and I think these protests are a very great development. But I think just traditionally, like in the past few years, we've seen that these institutions really just create, more workers that fuel the system, that almost act like a buffer class between like just general the regular people in the community and the oppressors. So I think what we need is more of this type of activity, more resistance, more protests that really stands up to the injustices going on, right? Like I think Alice spoke to the cop city, like the police academy or whatever. And gentrification, right? I think that's what we need from institutions like this that are producing our future Black leaders. So that's how I'm kind of seeing it. I think historically, right, like there's a small group that engages in these protests, and I think we need to support them because we need this type of resistance to take place. To really produce actual worthwhile change. I think we can also think about how a lot of these institutions, right, are caught up in policing, as has been stated before, right? Like in terms of how Morehouse and Spelman, their administrations really supported the development of Pop City, that $80 or $90 million development that has been proposed, and like some sort of resolution was passed in City Hall. I think we need to see that the administration and the interests of the university are pro the suppression of like just regular people in the community, that they're pro the continuation of the status quo, I guess, in our community, where folks face violence and just general exploitation. And I think just having these protests going on right now is very significant, because it speaks to an element of the student body that isn't going along with I guess the general relationship that like the students at these schools are supposed to have with EU issue is very significant. I think we can take inspiration from that and hopefully see more folks take inspiration from folks like Ellis and stand up to this system that they're facing.
So can each of you offer up 2 or 3 concrete ways that we can help students in this struggle, both on the campus and beyond?
I think that protest and resistance movements should be a part of political education and political consciousness within the classrooms. And so I think faculty members have almost a duty to put into context protests that are happening, and to also talk about the different sort of ways that protests become co-opted and pushed into reformist avenues, as Ellis was speaking about earlier. So I do think professors have that duty to, one, talk about the protests, make sure students have a voice in the classroom or space to talk about those protests, frame it in context to help with political education and political consciousness. Because I also think that, and this was definitely something that I assumed, but that the student body at an HBCU would already sort of know about these issues and be politically aware. But we do have to question the kinds of education that students are receiving even at HBCUs. And so while there were a lot of students who supported the protest, the broad-based support wasn't as broad as I would have expected it to be. And I do blame it on the lack of political consciousness and political education that is being done in classrooms, even at HBCUs. So that's one thing that I would do. And the second thing that I would do would also be to just sort of support student uprisings, movements, and organizations on campuses that also have that direct connection to the community that it's located in. And so when Ellis mentioned supporting the Ujima Collective, I think it's great that the Ujima Collective is not only talking about gentrification, lack of access to food, but also Cop City, because a lot of gentrification and the reason why you have these HBCUs supporting Cop City is because there is no plan in locales where HBCUs are located to address housing. We have a big homeless population that is, right down the street from the AUC, and there is no local official that even ran on addressing homelessness. They all ran on, increasing police presence. And so housing issues are not separated from policing issues, are not separated from issues of gentrification. And because you do need more police when your main goal is to protect property. And so I think making those connections and just talking to students about it and how it actually is affecting them daily on their campuses matter. And so I think that those two goals go hand in hand.
Thank you. Briefly, Tunde.
I will try. So yeah, I think definitely what Ellis and Tom and Nisha said about supporting the students and the Ujima Collective and political education and all of that. I think community members should also, try and, engage in this struggle themselves. I think not enough of us are engaged with, local organizations that are engaged, that are trying to support organizing efforts, and I think that is a big way to help out the students at the AUC, joining an organization and engaging in programs that are really helping your community. I think that would help in terms of, really just strengthening the movement that we need against the capitalism, right? Like the programs that I guess our state or our government supports that are in the interests of the very rich, right? And I think we need to collectively come together, right? Like I think the students are doing their job, and obviously we need to support their efforts, but we also need to get organized. We also need to politically educate ourselves so that we can be prepared to present real opposition to the system we're all up against. So that would be my addition to what has already been shared.
Thank you. Ellis, you can go ahead and share what you dropped in the chat.
Yeah, so I just wanted to let everyone know that so part of our program is we are going to be building mutual aid networks, not only for students, but also unhoused community members. So we have been doing kind of an active supply drive, but some active distributions to areas around ATL, like over by the Immaculate Church and courthouses in Walter. But we're actively taking in donations at the Promenade. And if you would like to support, our Instagram is ATL Ujima Collective, and our Cash App is AUC Student FUNDS, AUC Student Funds.
I was just finding y'all on Instagram. Okay. Thank you so much, Tamanisha, Ellis, and Tunde for joining us for this dope conversation. I think that we got at the problem at various levels. We will post all of the information that was discussed here in our show notes, not least the Cash App, the Instagram, and any student demands that Ellis wants to share. But thank you all so much again. And we hope to have more ongoing conversations about how this protest is developing.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, y'all, we are back with another favorite from last season in these tweets. So your girl, Layla and Two Black are gonna dig into these timelines and see what we've been talking about on the Bird app. So why don't you kick it off, Two Black?
So yeah, this is you retweeting a meme. So we're gonna read the meme first. I don't know. I ain't seen this before, so you can speak on this, but it always cracks me up when the left is referred to as radical, like the left is running around carrying assault rifles, denying science, and discussing not accepting the results of an election. So clearly that's a shot at the right wing. And then you said, I've seen this meme twice now, and I really don't get it. Radicalism, extremism are not the same thing. The left is radical, though maybe not so much in this country. So you can articulate what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean, just to keep it brief, basically what they're doing without trying to do it is like they're basically denigrating radicalism and making radicalism seem like it's some unhinged, extremist thing, which is why I said that radicalism and extremism are not the same thing. Radicalism, the denotation is grabbing something from the root. And so the left is radical, or the left is supposed to be radical, or it's not the left, it's the middle, or it's the right, right? And so I think that they're trying to sort of, they think it's probably a liberal who made this shit because they think they're trying to protect, the left from being critiqued or excoriated. But what they're really doing is misconstruing what it actually means to be on the left and what it actually means to be a radical. Those things are extremists, right? They're commonplace in this country, but those things are extremists, but they're not radical. And we can't see the term radical to the right in an attempt to sort of rehabilitate what it means to be on the left. Like, that's goofy to me. And so, although I think that the only sort of truth maybe in this meme is that the left in this country probably is not very radical if we take a sort of global perspective. So that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I guess something I've seen, I'm curious to get everybody's thoughts on it, where it's like, I've seen this mainly from like social Dems or even democratic socialist kind of types, where they'll say the left isn't radical. We shouldn't call Democrats, or we shouldn't call moderate Democrats moderates because the left positions are popular. So we shouldn't say we're radical when we are what's the norm in this country, like stuff like Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, like. So I'm just curious what y'all think about that idea that it's not really radical if everybody agrees with you.
Those things are not radical.
But we don't really have a left in this country. Not in the framework of electoral politics. Like, we don't have a real left in the framework of electoral politics. And so if saying, that kind of basic stuff it's not really that. I don't even know. I feel like it feels like a cop-out statement because we don't really have a left. That's really all I can say to that.
Yeah, and I would agree that though Medicare for all, minimum wage that is still does not match the sort of cost of living, those are not radical positions. Those are progressive in the context of the United States. And so, and the only reason that, and even the people that we call leftists in this country, like Bernie Sanders or AOC, they're not on the left. And so it's all relative here anyway. But again, when people are making those types of arguments, they're trying to race. It's a way of racing to the right, in my perspective, because you're trying to not say radical because the term radical is unpopular, but it's like, call the fucking spade a spade. It is what it is, right? And if these things are so popular, it should not matter what they're called, right? So. Yeah,
and I mean, I think go back to your original point about equating extremism with radicalism, I think is a good distinction, because I don't think enough people make that distinction, because you end up in a situation where anything that's not whatever the norm is becomes an extremist position. Malcolm X, I think, once made a point about how he was an extremist, but he was making it kind of as a subversive way to take shots at this idea that, I am an extremist because I believe in, basic equality, essentially. But the way it gets broken down, where there's like Clinton said, the radical left, the radical right, and, we have to understand each other in the middle, and it assumes there's this natural position of this political spectrum that is all the way tilted to the right anyway. So anything like Medicare for all, which is not even radical in other European countries, that are not by any means left either, or a minimum wage or paid leave, these are like basic ass things. So I agree with people who say it shouldn't be radical, but I don't think that's the same thing as what going further left actually means. And like you said, radical is about getting to the roots. It's not simply about just taking a hard line position about whatever, All right, so next tweet, we got more wholesome.
Speaking of getting to the root of things.
Yeah. So we got food, and we've been on here for a long time, so this looks actually very good. I should get some of this after I leave. But yeah, this is so what's going on here?
A lot of different things. I don't even know if I really want to say what all is going on here. I have a friend, I guess a boyfriend at this point, from Cameroon, and I decided to cook dinner. To find something that he might like.
This is a whole romantic moment here, basically. Yeah,
a little something like that. What I'll say about this is that for me, even with like planting thoughts and thinking about She Gathered Me, and I mentioned this in She Gathered Me, after my mom passed away in 2018, I just there are a lot of things that I didn't necessarily do, and I was just trying to find different kinds of practices to just engage with myself outside of the things that were kind of stressing me out. And cooking is one of those things that I do when I feel like it. I can cook, but nobody should ever come to me thinking that Layla is going to cook consistently, because I cook when I feel like it. And if I don't feel like cooking, I might eat crackers and cheese for dinner, okay? It's perfectly fine. But this particular meal is called Ndole, which, so in the blender is ground peanuts for a paste. There's turkey in the pot, stockfish, crawfish, shrimp. There's spinach in the back. In that little bowl right there is boiled ginger, onions, garlic. And it basically just gets cooked down into a stew, like a peanut butter type stew. And it was delicious and it was appreciated. And, that was my love and self-care for that day. So this one I chose from Too Black. Any strategy for Black liberation must be based not only on the needs and demands of Black people, but if it is to succeed, it must also be designed to counter the anticipated response of the opposition. So what was going on in your world when you tweeted this?
Well, as you can see, they had to go all the way back to September to find a tweet from me, because I don't ever tweet. But I was just reading a book. I'm working on something that I'm not gonna say because niggas be stealing shit. But I'm working on a paper right now, so I was reading that book as kind of it was to get me in the right state of mind, and I just that one stuck out. I think this is when he's talking about, and for anybody who's read the book, this is later on in the book, and he's talking about how people who are taking revolutionary positions basically need to be prepared for co-optation. And I hear a lot of today when people complain about that. He's writing this book in '69. That's why I love this book, because he's writing it right in the heart of when shit's going down. He's documenting stuff as it's happening. But today,
and the book, by the way, is.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot about that. Yeah, Black Awakening in Capitalist America. But by Robert Allen, that's the author. But yeah, he's talking about this sense of worrying about co-optation. You see this today on and on again, and it's does anyone ever consider just baking that into their actual program? because it's almost as if people think they're just going to do something separate and then nobody's going to come for them. And that's not how this works, you know?
Well, big ups to this quote because Robert Allen was on my qualifying exams committee. So at the time he wrote this book, he was a journalist, but then he went on to become a professor in the Comparative Ethnic Studies department at the University of California at Berkeley. And I actually wrote a review of this book. And then 2 years ago, in 2019, we had 2 panels of Black Awakening in Capitalist America at 50. So one was or I guess it was 60. Yeah. So one at the National Conference of one at ASALA and one at National Council for Black Studies. And so anyway, I just really love this quote. I just love Black Awakening. It remains relevant to this day. He offers a plan of action in that book that is still relevant today. And I think that he offers up, a trenchant critique of colonialism and what he calls internal neo-colonialism. And so we moved away from the internal colonial or understanding our thesis or understand ourselves as colonized subjects, I think, to our own peril. So,
yeah, and
Robert Allen.
On that last point, I might cut this out, but I just found this part interesting. When he's talking about the internal colonialism and transitioning to internal neo-colonialism, there's a part that I don't think gets enough attention when he talks about how the black bourgeoisie of old gets overthrown by this new class of a black bourgeoisie. He talks about how the advocates of black power never thought that was something that the black bourgeoisie would be interested in, and some of them were. And I was thinking about today, we have a similar kind of overthrow where, people wanted to reject respectability politics with no politics, but they really reject respectability politics. There's more diversity, there's more openness to different gender and sexual orientations and all of that. But they're still working within a kind of like neo-colonial framework. It's just like now we've broadened blackness. Like that's the kind of new overthrow of this neo-colonial class of black folks. We've broadened the spectrum of what blackness could be presented as. So it's not just men or anything, but it's still very much a neo-colonial relationship.
One thing I was thinking, when I always think about anticipating responses of opposition, I always think about like what it means to have a kind of internal preoccupation with the possibility of co-optation, and then what that means for sometimes not allowing it preemptively pushes us to not trust one another. Mm-hmm. Because of what we know are the possibilities. And so like I always wonder about like that kind of delicate dance between being aware of that possibility, but also not allowing that possibility to shape our interactions with one another as we are in struggle for things. Because, well, I shouldn't say not allowing it, but not for it to not over-determine our relationships with one another, because that's something that I think like we end up in that moment where who's an who are you working for? And then you end up having more internal conflict to our own detriment that we don't even get to this next place. And so I would just say that that's something that always comes up for me when we talk about the need to anticipate opposition responses.
Right.
Yeah, but I think that, well, for me, when he says to counter the anticipated response of the opposition, I think when you anticipate that, and I think that many organizations work like this, and even talking to people like John Bracey, it's kind of like when you know there's going to be infiltration, there's going to be ops, that's just what it is. It doesn't necessarily change your relationships but you build trust among one another. You build a type of connection to the best of your ability, whereby you just basically plan for that, because it's inevitable. It is inevitable, whether it's creeping liberalism, whether it's actual ops, whether it's provocateurs, whatever, it's inevitable. And so I think that that's why the anticipation is so important. And also anticipating internal conflict is important, so that when it actually happens, your shit doesn't implode, because you've already thought about it and have structures in place. So
I think one of the editors of Hakabi, it's a Joamu, he said, this is like y'all said, this is gonna be part of it, but our job is to make the police work. So if they go infiltrate, then our job is to make them work for revolution too, right? So whoever comes in the organization, your job is to make them do that, make it so insufferable where they either have to out themselves or they become a part of it. But you have to be on your principles to do that, right? You can't be constantly cop-jacketing people. So now we get to the one that we talked about previously, and I know it's not my turn to talk about it, but I just want to note, when I talked about this at the beginning of the show, we've been on here for a minute, it was at 33,000 likes, and now it's at 35,000 likes. And as y'all saw, even on the screen, it's still going. It might hit 36 before we're done talking. So take the stage, Layla.
So I don't know if I can even read in my Sharice voice. I don't know who needs to hear this, but you're a human, not a brand. Contrary to the neoliberalization of life, it is perfectly acceptable not to commodify or monetize your interests, hobbies, talents, personality, and insights, economic necessity notwithstanding. So what's going on with you over here? I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but maybe we can like broaden this discussion a little bit.
I just think that there's so much push toward making from the 5 streams of income brigade, from the side hustle brigade, from the rise and grind brigade, from the fucking increase your productivity brigade, to make every single thing we do, say, like, want, or are working on into some type of commodity or product. And I really hate that shit. And so many people talk about themselves as a brand or rebranding or expanding their brand when they're talking about their self. And it's like, brands used to be what they put on slaves. Why the fuck do you want to be a brand? Like, we used to call brands like a personality. I just don't really get that move, other than the fact that people just want to get a bag. And so I think that that is sort of what I was telling people, is like, if you want to be entrepreneurial with your hobbies or skills, fine, but it's perfectly okay not to. And just because you're not making money off of it doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing it or that you're doing it wrong. And I put economic necessity notwithstanding, because some people have, like, if you're good at cooking and you sell plates, you might need to do that because you need extra income. And so I'm a fucking communist. I understand the class realities, right? And so I feel like some people were interpreting this in bad faith, where it's like, well, why, if you can make money off of it, why not get it? Or people can't afford to have hobbies for free. Number one, I think that's aporophobic. Poor people or working class people actually do shit for free all the time, even video games. And so it's like, it's just a lie to think that every single thing you do has to be geared towards making money. It's fucking bullshit, right? But I'll also say that it's less to those people who are doing things, who are making plates or braiding hair on the side or whatever out of necessity, and more for those people who might be in a class position like yourself or myself, Layla, where it's like, so for example, with LDI, we can really try to like make a bag off this shit, but why? We love politics. We love talking about social material conditions. We like creating alternative content for our platform. We can just do that. We don't have to need to make a bag. Now, granted, we need to pay the homie 2 Black, and so that's why we have our Patreon, and shout out to our patrons. But we're not trying to make hand over fist. We're not trying to get sponsorship from Johnson & Johnson and shit. Like, we just out here. And I think, and that's sort of what I was railing against as I posted that. So
no, I think so. And I think even the notion that you can't afford to have hobbies, but actually to be able to live and be a human being is to do some shit that doesn't benefit anybody but yourself, right? And so like even, I was laughing earlier when 2 Black chose the tweet of me cooking, but like for me, that's like something like, when I decide I want to cook, or when I decide I want to go do yoga, or like, because even like I did a yoga teacher training over COVID, but even throughout the course of the teacher training, one of the sessions that we had was about branding yourself as a yoga teacher. And I was just like, bro, I'm not doing this. I wanted yoga teacher training to deepen my own practice with yoga, and maybe to be able to offer that as some skill sets to other people that I know, but not necessarily for a side hustle or a business, something that I was trying to make money off of. For me, it was literally one of the things that helped save my life after my mom died. And I was having all these fucking anxiety attacks. and needing to have a process whereby I re-engage with breathing. And for me, that's what that was. And so if I'm able to share that with somebody, then I'm happy to do that. But that's not something that I like. It's like they were getting on me the entire time because I wouldn't participate in the branding activities. I was like, this is not what I came here for. I didn't want to learn to teach yoga to brand myself. I wanted to learn to teach yoga so that I can help other people experience what yoga helped me experience when I was going through one of the most anxious, rough times in my life, right? And so we do have to be able to think about what it means to have activities outside of work, right? And that we are something beyond what we do for work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's his name? Giannis. I can't say the man's last name, so forgive me. I think it's Giannis
Marshall. No, Giannis Varoufakis.
Yeah. And he was talking about this term he coined techno-feudalism, and he talks about basically how there are no more markets, so everything is just a platform, like we were talking about at the beginning of the show. So he was saying how you log in and everything is this marketplace, quote unquote, but it's not a marketplace. It's just it's an algorithm that controls everything you see, everything you do, and we're all producing capital for these marketplaces, for this, as he called it, a fiefdom, because we're under techno-feudalism. So whether you're talking about Amazon or Facebook or even Twitter, like someone controls the entire algorithm. And you don't have any say over that at all. Like, so what you see is based on how somebody dictates that, versus in real life, you go to a store, even, it's not that bad. It's, as he says, it's monopoly capitalism, but it's not completely feudalism. So when you come back to this tweet and just thinking about how our hobbies, kind of like we were talking about at the beginning of the show, where even when you want to not monetize it, like the nature of the beast is to monetize it, right? Like, so even when you just want to say what's on your mind, or you just want to share a video, it starts to socialize you to feel like you got to turn that into something because, oh man, I'm getting likes or I'm picking up followers off of this. Like, I'm sharing my pictures of my kids. People like my kids. So let me start an Instagram page for my kid. Yeah. Or I'm going to make TikTok videos. Like, it just becomes, even when it might start organically, the way it socializes and pushes you, it turns you to many times become a brand, and you're not even thinking about it. It almost appears natural because you're just caught within this. If you take his framework, you're caught within this fiefdom that just produces that type of relationship.
Yeah, and I just think that that's why ideology is so important, or racial capitalism, because as you noted, we're ensconced in the beast to a certain degree, whether we like it or not, but we do have some autonomy. And so again, we can push back and not monetize everything. Just because you got 1,000, I got 35.9 thousand likes, it doesn't mean that now I'm going to start sitting here and try to craft the perfect fucking tweet so I get all these retweets. No, that's stupid. I'm going to post my raggedy book stack pictures where the shit be crooked, my table's in the background, my toes be in there. I don't care, like, because this is just what I want to do, you know what I mean? And so I think that it's important to recognize that this is how we're conscripted into this system, whether it's techno-feudalism, neoliberalism, hypercapitalism, whatever we want to call it. But we can push back against, we can resist it to the best of our ability, right? And it's just, everything just doesn't have to be about getting a bag. I just feel like that's so fucking tacky and unattractive to me. Like, granted, I want to be remunerated fairly. I want all my people to be remunerated fairly. I want everybody to have a decent standard of living and to be able to, to live a good life. But you can do that without chasing the bag all the time. And quite frequently, when you chase a bag all the time, you're inscribing a particular logic for exploitation that can preclude others from living a good life. So it's a no for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay,
right.
So back to the kid, Layla. Okay, and I just we're going to talk at the end of the show about a seminar that we're doing, which will feature Sekou Touré prominently. But you posted this quote: "Everything begins with the people and ends with the people. All we acquire in life and everything we enjoy will undeniably be a gift to the people. Throughout life, we will never be superior to the people because we emanate from them."
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things going on here. So actually, I think this comes from re-Africanization, if I'm not mistaken. And it was actually CBSU asked me about it, and I, since I'm here on fellowship, I went looking for it because a lot of Sekou Touré stuff is not readily available in the same way that like Kwame Nkrumah's stuff is. And so I found it in the library nearby here, and I scanned it. And it's available as a PDF if people want it. It's available as a searchable PDF if people want it.
We can link it.
I was also, yeah. And one of the things, I think we see versions of these kinds of tweets all the time from these kind of, these left communist, socialist, populist leaders. But for me, I think it's important to constantly sort of reintroduce people who are not, as much a part of the conversation into that. But then also, I just like the essence of the quote. I think that it's one of those things that can serve as like a mantra. If you remember, like, you ain't shit without the people. Like, none of this. Like, we can make a podcast all day, every day. If people ain't listening to it, then it's just there, right? Like, we're like, whatever we're doing, if we do it for the sake of people, for the sake of the masses of people, it will be worth doing. And as long as we remember that we are not outside of or above or better than, then we can continue to do good work. I think it is at that moment where and I think this is to your point, Sharice, about platform and whatever, is that when you get to that moment where you think that somehow you're above or like you have some kind of say over controlling people, then you move away from this, like the essence of this. And so for me, it was just something that I wanted to remind myself of.
Mm-hmm. And just quickly, like relating back to the previous conversation, it's one thing to do it for the people. It's another thing to do it for an audience. And that is what, like, the people are not your fucking audience. They're not your marketplace. They're not your consumer. They are the people. They are you. Just like I don't want somebody constantly selling me some shit. I'm not trying to constantly sell something to people. And so I think that I'm glad that you posted it, because it's also constantly reminding me of that and affirming how I want to relate to the content that I do put out.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we on to the homie 2 Black. So you were responding to a tweet. So can you scroll up so we can read what it was? Okay, so No Name had posted, under white domination, we consistently celebrate the quote, first Black, because we've been taught that assimilation into white society means safety, upward mobility, liberation. Beyond how this can lead to Black children idolizing the first Black billionaire or war criminal, it also individualizes, romanticizes Black success. It reduces our desire for collective liberation and makes us hyper-focused on white approval. We should want more than the first Black whatever, especially if their success is used as a tool to strengthen our love of capitalism. And to this, 2 Black, you replied with your poem, The First Black. You put agreed. In classic 2 Black succinctity, you put agreed and then linked your poem. And so can you talk a little bit about just this poem in general and why you thought it was a good response to what she was saying?
Yeah, I wrote this back in February this year, and
Black History Month, and
it was in response to Hood Communist was doing I think African Liberation Month. They were challenging people to get beyond. I think there's even an article called like "Fuck Black History Month" or something in Hood Communist stuff, but. So I was trying to get to think beyond the way that Black history is typically celebrated, which is very much, milk toast and, watered down. And one of the things that are always focused on is the first Black, like that's like the highlight of the month is a billion different first Blacks and to do everything. So when I was researching for the poem, can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, but the one of the target missiles, the same guy that helped with the device that you put in your heart, when you're having heart failure, helped also help perfect target missiles, for war. Same person. So I was like, what's the celebrate?
George Washington Carver. My man DWC.
He's the first Black for everything. So yeah, I was just like, I try to flip it on his head and be like, the first Black is actually like the opposite of what people make it out to be, So it's like, I would just tell people to read the poem, but or listen to the poem. But yeah, like so, like it says.
You ain't gonna give his name?
Say what?
Spit us a couple hot bars. Period. Super
I'm
hot
not out
fire.
here. I'm not out here to do poetry, man. But now when it says the first black president to order a drone strike on a wedding night, Change, the first black billionaire to help gentrify a borough, Brooklyn Stand Up, the first black colonel given a job to train an African death squad, AFRICOM, and I think the next is like the first black when rooting for everybody black goes wrong, like the first black mayor authorizing a move bomb, you know. So it's like a lot of these first black things are actually used against black people. And the first black is this idea to reify this idea of empire. So my whole point was it's not a person. I actually said that in the poem. It's an idea. It's a false idea that by putting, you know, like we talked about trickle down blackness, you put somebody at the top, and then this is gonna somehow come back to the rest of us. And then it just doesn't make any sense. Like I was just doing a show at a school last week, and I was like, just because they're like, okay, you're the first black scientist, that's not the first black person who was capable of doing that. You know, they just finally let you in because of whatever concessions they needed to make. Like, if you're the first black doctor or whatever, it's like, we've always been capable of doing this shit. So there's nothing to really celebrate, you know? Like, if anything, it's a token, it's a concession. So, yeah.
And probably the person we recognize as the first whatever, other than things that can be like the first person to receive a degree from somewhere, they probably not the first person that did that shit. But number one, what they've done is not recognized as science or engineering or medicine or whatever. And number two, white people didn't see it, so it didn't happen.
Yeah. So yeah, it doesn't, as a concept, it just doesn't hold up. Like, it's like, what do you know? And I'm tired of it being parroted to kids, because that's why I said, like, you know, indoctrinating. I changed this, I think. Like, I rewrote this poem since. But indoctrinating these at-risk black kids with their elitist trends, you know, if they work hard too, they can grow up to be grifting and simulationists just like us, achieving the same decadent black excellence. So it's very much like an indoctrination process by using the first black. And I just think that we need to reject that overall.
Yep, and this relates to that idea of intersectional imperialism, identity reductionism, all of the things, as you were saying, that help to reproduce empire. So
I don't have anything to add.
So that, you know, that was us in these tweets. For our next installment, we'll expand our examination of the Twitter sphere to find other types of tweets beyond our timelines, but we'll be back with another installment very soon. All right, y'all. So for my rant today, this has been a very me-centered episode. I apologize for that. But one thing I must say is, like, I need y'all to get the fuck up out my mouth, okay? Like, I'm so tired of people on Twitter talking about, oh, these big words and this academic jargon. Listen here. Let people just tweet what they want to tweet in the way that they want to tweet it. Let it come out how it comes out. Like, ain't nobody trying to sound smart. Ain't nobody trying to be intentionally obscure. Like, I read a lot of books. I write a lot. And so things come out how they come out. Sometimes it's profanity. Sometimes it's slang. Sometimes it's jargon. Sometimes it's big words. Like, let me live. Let others live. Just like you don't want us going around correcting grammar or telling people they should say this or say that. Like, I just really don't understand why people feel the need to police the type of language and the way that tweets come out, right? And so I'm sure that there are some people who try to be purposefully profound or, you know, pedantic with their shit. That's not me. The tweet come out how it come out. And so it really grinds my gears when people are like, oh, here you go using all this big words, or why'd you say it like that? Or regular people can't understand. First of all, regular people read. Regular people can understand things, right? Quote unquote, the masses. Like, it's very sort of aporophobic to think that just because people are working class or poor that they can't understand particular words. And also, many people are using social media from their phones. Google that shit if you really want to understand. Or here's the other thing, simply keep scrolling. You don't have to be all up in my mouth. So here's what I would suggest. Hop up off my ovaries, right? And then hop up off my timeline if you don't like the type of words that I use. So, you know, let me use my vocabulary like you let Biden use y'all for your vote. Bye. It's about that time to wrap up, y'all. But before we go, Layla has a very important announcement.
All right, y'all. So your favorite duo has teamed up to run a seminar on revolutionary Pan-Africanism for Insight, for the organization Insight. So I was reminded of this as we were talking today. So the seminar is going to be on Saturday, November 20th at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So if you all are interested in joining us, if you want a couple more hours with us next week, please do sign up for the seminar. We will drop the link in the show notes.
And that's our show this Friday evening. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us. So thanks for tuning in.
I'm Dr. Layla Brown here with my girl CBS. And as always, thanks to Two Black in the Back.
Peace.